BookTube, and welcome to Season 2 of Has Steve Read It? I participated in what is now Season 1 of Has Steve Read It? I did a science fiction edition, in which I pretty much selected exclusively science fiction and fantasy. Well, mostly, all fantasy. And I got 2 beans. So I'm back with Season 2, hoping to improve my score. Let's see. So the first book I have is a work of wuxia, which is a Chinese martial arts fiction. It's largely sort of martial arts fantasy. So this book is Fox Volant of the Snowy Mountain by Yong. Yong is one of the most famous Chinese writers of the 20th century. He died about a year or 2 ago, and he is most famous for his Condor trilogy, of which the first book, The Legend of the Condor Heroes, is wrapping up. The British editions have already all come out, and I'll talk about that later in Weekly Reads. And I think the American editions will be wrapping up in the next few months. So Fox Volant of the Snowy Mountain is an earlier book of his that was translated into English a few decades ago. And it's a standalone. It's about a group of unscrupulous martial artists who are after a treasure. And while they're fighting over this treasure, they are recruited by a monk to help the master of a nearby mansion fend off this roving bandit called Fox Volant of the Snowy Mountain. And while they're waiting for Fox to show up, the various characters begin telling tales that all center around events that happened 20 years ago, in which the 2 martial brothers are set in opposition to each other. They fight to the death, and how this conflict sort of comes forward in time to the present as the son of the slain martial brother gets the opportunity to seek his revenge on his father's slayer. Unfortunately, he also falls in love with said slayer's daughter. And so at the end of the novel, they have a fight, and it's left ambiguous as to what happens. And it's been a few years since I've read this book, and I quite enjoyed it. It is really fun. Although, at the time, I had a bit of an issue with how the names were done. They were rather translated, or like nicknames. But I can kind of, so that kind of bugged me at the time. Although, with the translation of The Legend of the Condor Heroes, I'm a bit more forgiving of it now, and I'm probably well overdue for a reread of this. Because it's been 4 or 5 years since I've read it. Anyway, next up is a work of poetry. This is Counting Myself Lucky, Selected Poems 1963 to 1992 by Edward Field. Edward Field is a gay poet whose works spread most of the late 20th century. He's known for some of his poems are really visceral, and some of his poems are very pop culture oriented, and I really prefer his pop culture poems, particularly the poems that appear in a variety of photoplays, and especially Stars in My Eyes, which I had long ago and I don't have anymore. I probably should really aim to re-get. But anyway, so I But Counting Myself Lucky is the first collection of his that I got. I first discovered him in an anthology of gay poets, and I quite liked his work. And I got this and really enjoyed it. Reread it a few months ago, or more like about a year ago, and still enjoyed it. So yeah, have you read this, Steve? And if you have, what did you make of it? Next up is a book of writing advice, or writing how-to. This is Wonderbook by Jeff Vandermeer. This is basically a how-to writing guide in which Vandermeer tries to get the reader to, or prospective writer, to kind of write in a similar style. That the style that Vandermeer is teaching is basically the sort of new, weird, speculative fiction, more literary side of science fiction and fantasy. And the book itself is quite fun. It's very whimsical. A lot of the examples Vandermeer gives from his own work, as well as some of the guest commentators and writers he has sort of popping up, is quite cool. There's also a lot of very interesting characters that kind of pop up. There's Mr. Odd and a few others. And some of the art in here is amazing. Let me show you some. You like it. And anyway, I quite like this book. It is one of my favorite writing guides. Next, we're going to move into history, which might be a bit of some dangerous territory because history is one of Steve's areas of interest. But anyway, let's go. So first up is Revolution in the Air by Max Elbaum. This is a history of American radicalism in the 60s and how these radicals were influenced by Lenin and Mao and Che, and how gradually over the course of into the 70s and into the 80s, how a lot of these radicals sort of ran out of steam, and sort of how with the 80s a lot of the radical movement sort of petered out and really lost its influence on America. And it's quite good, very technical, very dense, but I surprisingly liked it. Another book I really enjoyed reading from last year is Insurgent Empire by Priyamvada Gopal. This is a history in which Gopal explores how British writers and British radicals and ordinary Brits opposed various colonial enterprises that Britain engaged in over the course of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, from Jamaica to India to Kenya. And this book is amazing. I really enjoyed it. And yeah. So Steve, if you have read it, what did you make of it? Or have you read it? Next up is a book that I am in the process of reading. It is Wind in the Tower by Suyin. So far, I'm not too far into it. But this is essentially a history of China after the Communist Revolution, from 1949 to 1974, 75, written in the 70s, so it's recent history of the time, and based largely on Han Suyin's um, encounters with China over the course of a decade or more when she yearly go. The book is noted for Han Suyin's support of Mao in the Chinese Revolution, or the Communist Revolution in China, as well as her support of the Cultural Revolution. And obviously, that kind of raises some problems because this book is outdated. Um, Obviously, we know a lot more now about what was going on at the time. So a lot of her arguments aren't true. Now, whether she lied or she was lied to, yeah, it's that this book does not really portray what went on accurately. Um, but at the same time, I mean, there is some value to the book in that it does show what some people saw going on. That it sort of has a worth in sort of what like people were thinking at the time, or like the propaganda and all of that. So I'm not entirely sure what I make of this. I am still only about 2 or 3 chapters in, and I'm going to continue reading it tonight. So yeah, we'll see. So next up is the book I'm going to read next. So I haven't read it yet. And that is The History of Bhutan by Karma Phuntsho, which I'm assuming is going to be a big soup to nuts history of Bhutan, and I'm quite looking forward to getting to it, starting either tomorrow or Sunday, depending how Wind in the Tower turns out. So, Steve, have you read The History of Bhutan? Now that makes 7 books, and I need an 8th. So my 8th book is a book that I don't have anymore. I did have a volume of this. Oh, and it's not necessarily a book, it's a series, but we're going to go with the first volume. So, Steve, have you read Fullmetal Alchemist by Hiromu Arakawa? Fullmetal Alchemist is a shonen manga series which lasted 20 some odd volumes, and it's about Edward and Alphonse Elric, who are alchemists, which in this world's a form of magic, and they are in pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone because when they were younger and newly trained alchemists, they sought to bring their mother back from the dead. And in committing this sin, Edward lost his leg and Alphonse his body. And to save Alphonse, Edward sacrificed his arm to attach Alphonse's soul to a piece of armor. And they seek the Philosopher's Stone so that they can avoid paying equivalent exchange and get their bodies back, because the Philosopher's Stone is an alchemical artifact in which the law of equivalent exchange is voided. That you don't have to pay it, which in alchemy, basically if you're making something or using alchemy to create something or to elicit a certain effect, you need to pay a certain price in material, or if it's human transmutation, body parts. And as the Elric brothers journey across their homeland of Amestris, they stumble upon an ancient conspiracy which will not only draw them in, but also many of their friends and family to not only save their country, but also save themselves. because the Ulrich brothers play a critical role in this ancient conspiracy. Fullmetal Alchemist is one of my favorite manga series, and I don't have any manga anymore. I had several series years ago and got rid of them. And I'm currently in a state of debating whether or not I want to get back into collecting manga, but that's neither here nor there. But Steve, have you read Fullmetal Alchemist? Or in this case, I guess just a single volume. If you've read a single volume, we'll count that. But anyway, so this is my contribution to season 2 of Has Steve Read It? If you would wait. So hopefully I do better this time around than I did last time, or at least I get 2 beans, because I did get 2 last time. And hopefully I don't have as many face palms, because last season was pretty much all face palms. But anyway, so anyway, I'm going to go ahead and sign off for now, and I will be back later with weekly reads. Although again, that's neither here nor there, it's something different. But anyway, until next time, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.